Hey, what's up, guys and girls? My name is Gray, and this is another episode of the Gray F podcast. And today we have another exciting guest by the name of Jonas Koffler. I know to some of you the name rings a bell, and to some of you not, but John is a best-selling author of Hustle, the power to charge your life with money, meaning, and momentum. And it ended up to become a New York Times, Los Angeles Times, IndieBound, and USA Today bestseller. It has been published in multiple languages and 15 countries globally, and Fortune says is a must-read for any entrepreneur. And I read it last year, I remember, and picked up a lot from it, which I hope you guys can sort of get a sense of the book just by my interview with John. And if you haven't checked it out, definitely I recommend that you check out the book, and I will put the link in the description as far as everything that's said in the podcast as well. So right before we jump in, I'm just going to give you a more detailed description of John. John is also a stroke survivor turned yoga practitioner and meditator, a startup cofounder, a writer and a film media producer, and an entrepreneur involved in numerous ventures. So in our conversation, we got into a lot, but my intention was to make this episode about a hustle guide for artists. So I thought John is actually the perfect person for that, because he is an artist and he wrote the book Hustle, which actually goes in detail on how you can sort of hustle out your career. And obviously the principles applies to sort of any spectrum of your life. For me, this is a very important topic, especially myself being an artist. There are a couple of things that I've been struggling with over my career as an artist. For some of you who are not familiar with this, I am a CGI artist, if there's such a thing. It means I am a digital artist. I do computer-generated imagery, even though I do not get to do a lot of that at the moment because of my other entrepreneurial ventures. So my time is split between or among all the things that I'm involved in. But being an artist is something that I definitely am, and I've always been. So from that experience, I'm familiar, or I know some of the problems that artists get in trouble with, or they struggle with. You know, for one of the common examples being handling art and business. Even though it can be one thing, but the split between the two to be able to do great art and to manage the business side of it is something that I've struggled with over the years. And I know a lot of artists out there find this difficult. So this was also part of our conversation on how you can bridge the two. And of course, among other areas on this. One aspect of the interview that struck out to me was about health as well, because as I said, John is a stroke survivor, so he has a few lessons to teach on that. And I mean, definitely from his story, which happened of course many years ago, but the principles applies today. You know, he overworked himself to the point that he had stroke as a side effect. So I picked up something from that, and I hope you guys do too as well, like I said. And before I close, just want to remind you that the Gray F podcast is not supported by any ads, and I do that intentionally. I do not want to contaminate the content with any sort of advertising. So it's self-funded. So I would appreciate it if you support it, and the way you can support it actually is not with any sort of money. It's just by sharing it on your social media. If you're listening on SoundCloud, you can repost. And if you're listening via iTunes or the podcast app, I would appreciate it if you leave me a 5-star review. Other than that, I hope you enjoy it. If you have anything else to say, you can drop it in the comments on my website, which is www.grayjabesi.com. And other than that, I hope you enjoy this conversation. Thank you.
It's been quite hot here in New York. The temperature fluctuations are a little crazy, so it's weighing on my soul to some degree. But it's lovely. Spring has finally hit. I guess you guys are in fall down there, correct?
We are actually supposed to be in winter. We are in winter essentially, but.
Oh, you're in winter. Okay, right, sure.
Yes, but like I don't know what's happening. It's still almost summer. We're still getting like hot days. And there's a water problem actually here now.
Do you have a shortage, or what is it?
Yeah, because of no rainfall for a very long time. Now we're running at about 20% of our water storage.
Oh man, that's terrible.
Yeah, so the tap water is almost undrinkable.
Oh my God, that's horrible, bud. Stay hydrated somehow.
Yeah, we're trying. I'm actually drinking milk right now because I forgot to buy water when I was coming down home from the office. So
wow.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. But
and tell me, great. What part of Cape Town are you in? Because my wife and I had a wonderful opportunity to go some years back in May 2010, so just before the World Cup. And we absolutely fell in love with South Africa. It's such a wonderful place. The people are amazing. The landscapes and scenery are off the chart. It's just a magical, magical place. What part of the city are you in?
Actually in the CBD, like right in the center. I live. My office is on Long Street, which is like a popular street for like party. It never gets dark there. It's like always vibing. And then my house is just a couple of meters away from there as well. So like I live right in the center of the city.
Okay, interesting.
I can feel the mountain very close. The ocean is very close. So yeah, it's pretty nice setup.
Yeah, and I imagine you draw a lot of inspiration from that. We can talk about that in the interview. For reference, we stayed at the Granddaddy on Long Street. Yes. Do you know the place?
Yes, of course.
With the trailers on top?
Yeah. I know the Granddaddy.
Yeah. So we had a good time, man. It was an interesting trip. We really enjoyed it. I wish we had more time. Maybe next time we can have a meal in person or something.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely an amazing city. Are you like based in New York?
So I can kind of unpack this on the call, but on the interview. But basically, we are based in Austin, Texas, which is a very low-key, sort of funky city in the U.S. And we're between Los Angeles, where we have some ventures out there, and then in New York, where I do a lot of literary stuff, and as I mentioned, the TV pilot and other things that we're working on, and we'll probably be relocating, spending more time in New York, but we bounce around between LA, Austin, New York, and Vancouver, primarily, and Mexico City to some degree.
If you go to a party or to a dinner table and a stranger come to you and say, what exactly is hustle, or what is your book all about? How do you break that down?
Sure. So just so I'm clear, Gray, and I apologize. So we are recording, yeah?
Yes, we are recording.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah.
So how I would break down hustle is the following. What we were trying to do in approaching this concept that we felt was very sort of zeitgeisty, and really is about enshrining and celebrating the spirit of creating your own model for life, especially given what we see as a very much an anachronistic or outdated, rigid and very conditioned model that's been imposed on us for 100 years or not more, is to say, look, there's another way of living. You don't have to go through life in the general motions of being born and going to school and then sort of figuring out what you're interested in, saddling yourself up with debt often, and then joining a workforce, buying a car, marrying, taking out the mortgage, having kids, finding your career, and so forth. We think there's another way to orienting to what you, given that life is very short, that you alone are responsible for your own happiness. You can't, and you have to search for it and sort of discover who you are. And so we thought about what is a word that's sort of representative of that, but is also representative of a word that's kind of in currency now that everyone seems to be using, but some people are using for maybe the wrong reasons or unclear reasons. And that's how we came up with this idea of hustle. And the idea is that you can shake free of general convention and find a more adventurous way of moving forward in the world through creative problem solving and personal innovation and reinventing who you are along the way, and also sort of channeling or tapping your well of imagination. Because if you simply ape or copy what everyone else is doing, then how do you really know who you are and what makes you happy? And so that's what we saw it as. It's really kind of an antidote to the pain that so many people are feeling, and really drawing on a lot of small risks and everyday experiments, and the types of entrepreneurial approaches that allow us to surface our talents and push us toward the pursuits that ultimately reveal our best selves, right? They're the things that, the tools, the tactics, the techniques, the ways of moving in a way that makes us feel not only more human and more like ourselves, but allow us to be ourselves, and then to consciously create the life that you want. And so that's what hustle really means. The way that we've defined it, which is somewhat antithetical to simply putting your head down and running through a brick wall when you need to tackle something, is instead a little more nuanced. And the definition is decisive movement toward a goal, however indirect, by which the motion itself manufactures luck, surfaces hidden opportunities, and challenges our lives with more money, charges our lives with more money, meaning, and momentum. So that charging or empowering is really code for giving ourselves capacity to allow, to sustain our journey through money, to make meaning or give ourselves a deeper sense of fulfillment, and then momentum, which is the notion that we are again required to move in life. We can't sit still, because that's the only way we're able to enact any kind of positive change, is by making things happen. So that's in a nutshell, and we can unpack it a little more as we kind of talk through luck and how it relates to the world of art.
Right. So, like I said, one of the first things that I wanted you to break down as well is the 10-minute rule, because to me, that's something that I don't know if you do this, John, but I like to keep a few things to remind me of the things that I have to always pay attention to. So I have a few quotes, a few videos, a few excerpts from the books that I always have to get back to remind me of a few things. So the 10-minute rule is one of those things where I actually checked it out last week sometime, because I was cluttered dealing with a lot of things, and then I lost track of a few things that I was working on. So just break down what the 10-minute rule is for those who are not familiar with it, because I read it from your book.
Sure. Well, let me give you a little more context first about how we arrived at this. I think that most people are trapped by a couple things, especially sort of this as artists. We people who can be somewhat neurotic about our own art. And also, if we're staring into a blank canvas, there's always a big question: what do we do, and how do we do it? And so, if we then expand that into the big navigational questions and existential questions around life, who am I, where am I going, how do I get there? We can apply that to the art world. We can apply that to our professional lives. But part of it is simply getting beyond ourselves or getting out of our own way. That's so hard to do for so many people. I think everyone can struggle with that in any given day. And so how do we do that? We came up with this idea of the 10-minute rule, because we think we're creatures of habit. And I'm a big believer of rituals and establishing positive rituals. And I think it's a little bit to break through our self-imposed friction, that inertia that we have or we wake up with every day, right? How do we get started? So the 10-minute rule is very simple. It's a way for anyone to stay or become more productive sort of instantaneously, be present in what they're doing and their work, so being focused, right? And then putting themselves in a place of momentum. And so the way that we do this, and the reason we practice, is because it saves us some degree of pain, suffering, and headaches, and allows us to quickly move from the madness of mastery, or what we call the perils of perfection, into this sort of imperfect yet active sort of change agent in our own lives. And so this is the way it works. Basically, we can do something for 10 minutes and not over-evaluate or over-analyze. It's the spirit of going from dreaming or thinking or overthinking into direct action. So, for example, if you are contemplating, and this applies again across different spectrums of human experience. So if you're thinking about taking a hike or doing exercise, you might think, and then never do it, right? And then the next sort of the day goes by and you haven't done anything. If instead you just get out, you don't overthink it, and you put yourself in motion for 10 minutes, you're going to find that you've liberated all of that weight of your mind, and you're now actually in progress or in action or in motion. The same is true for, let's say, you're a writer or a musician or some kind of artist. Start illustrating. Start playing your music or composing something, right? Start writing. But do it for 10 minutes without any judgment. Remove that heavy burden or that weight of thinking you have to get it perfect or right. And instead of thinking about like that perfection, do something really awful. Like just make something completely discordant, or maybe it's a sketch that is a simple study that looks horrible. That's perfectly okay, because doing the bad work will eventually lead you to doing good work. But it's, again, getting out of your own way for 10 minutes. So in a very practical, pragmatic sense, it's sitting down, or if you're a stand-up kind of person, if you prefer that, it's focusing for 10 minutes. You can set your clock and just start moving. Turn off all of the things that are distracting to you. Put your phone on airplane mode, and close out your social media, and just try to hone your focus a little bit. And if you can do that for 10 minutes, we argue that that'll lead you to finding a longer period of success. Maybe it's another 90 minutes of effort, and you can just sort of keep repeating until you need to take a break and can be unfocused again. But again, the whole idea, the premise, is just to put yourself in motion without overthinking things, because that takes you out of your head and puts you into a place where you're actually productive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, to the people listening, I hope they picked up from that, because that's what I think I've talked a little bit about that in the podcast, like just finding a moment where you can disconnect from everything and just get started with exactly what we need to be doing. Just to point out, like, for example, social media is really, really hard to turn off and like disconnect for a lot of people. I used to be one of those people as well, but now I'm like over it. So, like I told you, the most important part of this episode to me was a hustle guide for artists. For myself, being an artist as well, and I know I follow you like you're an artist. There is a situation or an instinct of where, if you're growing up as an artist, you want to make great art, and you develop your skills, working hard and harder to get better at what you do, and then that tends to also turn off the other side of the spectrum where you had to be active. On my end, for example, in my experience, I could work on art and become better at art, but then I had a problem that I couldn't generate cash out of it. I couldn't make money. So my life was becoming difficult, but I was making great art. And it's still the problem that I see among other artists as well, like some of my friends and stuff like that. And a lot of artists are kind of in the same situation where like they can make great art, but they can't sustain themselves financially. And then when I turned on the other side to actually say, look, I want to change over my life and, balance the two together so that I can make great art and at the same time make a great income in something that I really do well, it ended up that I was spending more time on generating cash or making money out of my art than actually making the art itself. So it kind of limited my growth in the art itself. I don't know if you understand what I mean, but like the question I guess now is like, how do you balance the two to say you can still be able to grow in your art, practice and do the things you want, on the other side still grow your income and make a good living out of what you're doing?
I think they're not mutually exclusive ideas. On the contrary, Gray, I think if we've learned anything from some of the most successful artists, their success has brought them or given them the ability to take on more risks and try more interesting experiments with their art. It's allowed them to grow. And so, but I also think, especially younger artists, grapple with this idea that you have to starve or suffer to become a good artist, or to create great work. And there may be some degree of or shred of truth to that, but I would argue that it's not the suffering that makes the great artist. I think we're all human beings, and I think the essence of humanity is some degree of suffering. And that's not only true of human beings, that's true of all animals, right? I mean, it's not hard to look at in the eyes of someone else or a dog on the street and say, wow, there's some suffering or some pity that I can feel for that being, right? The sentient being. So I would look at it and reframe it a little bit. I think first, move away from the idea of you have to starve. You don't have to be a starving artist. In the book, we talk about this at length. We talk starving your starving artist and feeding the hungry hustler. So what does that mean? That means that you move away from this idea of suffering and that you create the space in your life where you can thrive as an artist. And you're constantly working toward that. It's not that you're chasing money. You're chasing the ability to sustain the ability to create work and hopefully to do good work and maybe a mix of bad work as well. But the idea is it's an upward arc, right, with some dips and peaks and valleys and so forth. And that's, this idea that you are sort of a work in progress yourself, and your art is a reflection of that. Generally speaking, there's no hockey stick type of graph for artists. It generally doesn't work that way. I mean, there's a very few who fit into that unicorn role, Banksy, etc., or Picasso, whatever. But you don't have to aspire to that. You want to be develop the ability to be a working artist and to be able to draw praise for the work you do. And so what's that? Part of that is a mindset piece, and I think that the other part of it is a work ethic piece, right? So you should commit and focus your imagination, creativity, energy, enthusiasm, resources, and so forth to some degree of dreaming about your art and then also doing great art. And in the process, as you're doing that, you're developing what we call pop. And pop is important because it allows you to work consistently and sustainably in a way the rest of your life. And they're basically 4 pieces that are important. And these will lead you to developing a platform where people know and like your work and can discover you. And so it is intuitive to some degree, but the basic idea is this. You're a working artist, so you want to be developing your potential. So what does that mean? That means you're developing your skill set, you're working through problems, you're looking at new ways to explore how you can convey your art in the world, whether it's, if it's musical or visual or storytelling or some mix of those, architectural, what have you, film, etc. But you have to work every day toward growth, and that growth will enable you or empower you to continue pushing the boundaries. That's an act of will. All right? That's the hard part. I would argue the easier part is putting yourself out there to meet people. So if the first layer of pop is all about potential, what we call the opportunity capability, the second component is people. No artist survives without some kind of patron or some fan or someone saying, or critic for that matter, your work is wonderful, your work is shit. You have to find people who will give you feedback. And it's not only finding people who will give you feedback, you want to find advocates who also support your work or can tell other people about it, hopefully help you promote. And that's about you going out in the world and building some degree of people leverage, right? So the whole thing about people, this network thing is, it's the opportunity community. And maybe it's you teaching a class, or maybe it's you doing some kind of public art installation. It's finding a way to connect with people about your work, have a conversation about it, help them understand you and understand your work in the world and where it fits and why it's important. But you need people. So again, it's moving from potential, it's working on yourself, to people, helping other people, and working on that degree of community, which is absolutely critical. And hopefully it's relationships you maintain the rest of your life. That's absolutely critical. The next piece is that whole bucket around projects. And this is where, hopefully the monetization comes in, right? So you're working through your art, or maybe you have a professional day job and you're working on your art as a side gig or side hustle. But the idea is to constantly add value through your work and have people respect and admire it and give you feedback and so forth. But you want to also stay productive and take on interesting projects that allow you to grow. And then beyond that, when if you're able to, to create some works that draw some response, they're your own. And so if you're moving from projects, the opportunity of creativity, where you're growing and you're exploring things, you move into this proof layer. And proof is the highest and most important layer, I would argue, as an artist, because it's the opportunity of credibility. It allows you, Gray, to say, I did that installation and it drew 100 million views, or I was able to collaborate on this project and we got this review in the paper or online, or someone did a documentary on us because they were blown away by the good that we were doing, etc. The proof piece is huge because it allows you to get discovered, and it enhances your reputation. It points to some track record of success. It also differentiates you, and to some degree, it draws on what I was talking about, this luck component that is so critical in hustle, and that is simply putting yourself out there, putting yourself in motion, and getting lucky because people will find you. So that all of this is to say that you're looking to build a personal opportunity portfolio of these four pieces: potential, people, projects, and proof. These opportunities combined are going to allow you to thrive in some degree, but it also requires you to stay active and to stay proactive and growing. So I think that, as we started with the 10-minute rule, right? The 10-minute rule is really around harnessing your talents and not getting distracted, and knowing that it is going to be an uphill challenge, but you don't have to overthink it, right? One of the beauties in life is that you have the ability to create. And so if you force yourself into a disciplined bubble where you're working every day, even just a little bit, then you can decide sort of how big or how small you want to go with each individual project you take on. And so I hope that offers a little color. And I say that, I think the POP applies as well to someone who's just starting out as it does to someone who's more advanced. It really is a harmonious cycle.
Interesting. It's like, I've got over it now, but whenever I did something that's not really artistic, like doing some admin or just doing some business side of my art, it felt like I'm actually not doing art itself. Until at a later stage I realized it's just part of doing great art and growth. But like to some people who might be in a certain situation where just because they focus more on growing as an artist and creating good art, they're at a situation where they don't know any other alternative of what to do, even though they might not be happy with their current situation. Like if they have a full-time job, they're doing art for some company, but they're not happy because they're not expressing themselves the way they would if they did it otherwise. And then it just becomes fate to them. That's like how things are, even though they could change it, but they don't know any other way. What would be your talk to that kind of person in that situation? How can they plug themselves out? I think the practical question would be, how can somebody get themselves out of the job they don't like and go out and monetize their art?
Sure. Okay. So as we talked about, right, I don't think there's, I think it's quite simple, and I don't think it's, when you're moving from the assumed or thought security of a job into this sort of unknown world, right? You're migrating or pivoting.
Yes.
The main thing to do is to really start developing your self-confidence. So how do you do that? You start taking a little more risks every day. And I think beyond that, you really focus heavily on that people layer, that opportunity of community. Why? Because opportunities are connected to people. People give you jobs. Meeting new people may give you an opportunity to get a commission. Perhaps someone needs something, even if it's a small scale project that you can help out with. People will talk about you. The idea is you can't possibly advance by overthinking and sulking about how great you are as an artist, but how empty your life feels because you're not having success. Okay? People are your life. People are your life. It's not the art alone. It's not commerce. Everything begins and ends with your relationships. And if you forget that, or you lose sight of it, or you never knew that, then I'm telling you this now. People are your life. And it's when we isolate ourselves, we forget that. And that's the most damaging thing you can do to yourself as an artist, because people are hungry for this. Why are they hungry for art? Because art expresses something that we can't, something even spiritual that we can't quite capture or convey. It's almost an ineffable magic that artists uniquely possess. But if you're not out there meeting people and talking about it, even if the first 50 times you try to meet people, you fail miserably, who cares? You have to keep putting yourself out there, right? And it doesn't mean you have to be the most sociable person, all right? I mean, we can look at a litany of artists over the years who've just been horrible people, when it comes to like social situations. Think of like Jackson Pollock and abject alcoholism. That doesn't matter. You just put yourself out there and like give people an opportunity. Try to treat them with dignity and respect, and be open to their feedback. You don't have to respond to it either way, positive or negatively. Be open to listening, but be open to sharing, because people want that. They want that experience. They like artists in their lives, because I think artists are sort of like the Jedis in our world. Artists have that special force, right? And it's such a unique gift and talent and ability, and people crave that. And so you have to put it out there, and you have to meet people. And how do you do it? It's just by striking up a conversation. Hey, I'm blah, blah, blah. I'm an artist. Here's my work. I'd love to share it with you. Well, that's pretty simple, right? And they're either going to say great, or they're going to say I'm not interested. That's fine. You move on. There are 8 billion people on our planet. Come on.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about how, for somebody who is not like used to go out and meet people. Myself, I used to be an introvert. I'm still at the core, but like I learned the skill of actually intentionally going there and meet people for practice, just so that I can get together my confidence and just being able to speak to anyone. And some of the, I would say, tactics I used was like to just go out and meet 10 people, random strangers, and just talk to them about anything. I don't know, what else would you recommend for people just like to, in the experimental mindset, that they can try for themselves?
Sure. Okay. So the first thing is, you're not entering into a relationship simply to sell your work. You're actually instead like that's a great outcome if it happens. But instead, like, think about the value exchange or simply supporting someone else, listening to people, finding a way to feel more connected. And why is that important? So think about the psychological underpinnings. Think about Maslow and other psychologists who historically outlined our need for belonging and interaction, right? They're key drivers in our lives. And if you think about our human history and how we evolved out of caves, people wanted to be around other people. Community is the underpinning. And one of the biggest determinants of our happiness, our sense of fulfillment in life, is making those meaningful connections. Okay, so how do you actually do that? You have to put yourself in contexts or situations where other people can experience, your kindness or greatness or generosity or empathy, listening, right? And so you can do that at a cafe. Maybe you set up an art night or artist hangout night or community-focused night. Maybe it's around art therapy or artist healing. Find the local thing, things that you can directly impact. Go to a cafe or a bookstore or create some kind of social gathering. How easy is it to create a Facebook meetup group around something that's interesting? Maybe it's a theme for the month that you design, and you get other people to collaborate in some kind of public art installation with music and visuals and poetry and so forth. People crave this stuff because it removes them from the doldrums or distractions of the meaningless things in life, the politics that are so crazy and charged these days. Who cares about that shit? Come back to humanity. Create light in the world. People crave that. So, as an artist, I would say part of your responsibility, if you really care, not simply about succeeding, but you care about the world and humanity, moving people forward, is to create experiences that people remember. And maybe it's you going out and making a post on social media, or going out and posting flyers, or going to a cafe and talking to other people who get it. They're going to say, yes, I'm open to that idea. So you want to do a public installation? Cool. What does that look like? And then maybe there's some fundraising involved. Who knows? Maybe you can do it in a very cheap fashion. But you have to be open to it. And so part of that is giving yourself or allowing yourself the space to, again, navigate through something that might be of interest to people and asking the question, Gray, what can I do immediately in my, what's a problem that people are dealing with immediately in my locality? How might we address that? Is it violence against women? Is it the lack of public art installations? Is it something along those lines? Start asking those questions and seeing who else would be interested to get behind it. And it doesn't take 100 people. It may only take a few people to work with you and to go out and drum up support and do something that your community enjoys. It's those kinds of things. And then when you're at events or whatever, you introduce yourself as an artist and talk about why you're so passionate, why you enjoy the work you do, and what makes it interesting for you. It's putting yourself out there in those kinds of ways. And again, it doesn't require a massive effort. It's simply shifting and tweaking the way that you approach people. Instead of saying, what's in it for me, ask about what can you do for someone else. Like, that's a great question. So introduce, or maybe you're in between people that you can introduce. Find out what someone's interested in, and then think through your contacts or network about how you might create a collaborative opportunity between people. So that's the common. Find the common ground, and then try to introduce people who don't know each other. They're going to consider you the bridge, and that hopefully will lead to other opportunities.
Right. It's actually recently, speaking of the experiment and experimental mindset, recently there was this other girl who has an Instagram account. So she's a really, really good painter. She's like a digital artist. So she paints and then she puts the portraits online on Instagram for people to see. So like I saw one of her posts and I was like intrigued. I was like, wow, this is great. Now I texted her. I'm like, can you make this for anyone who asks you to do? She's like, what I'm doing, it's for my friends only. So all the things that you're looking at, I did them for my friends. I've never done it for anyone for like financial reasons or to get something from it. So I was like, okay, could you do the same for me then? I would pay you for it. How much would you quote me? It took her a while to actually get back to me, like over 6 hours, to just come up with how much she want to quote me. Then I sensed that, okay, she's still at the point where she doesn't feel like her art is good enough just to get paid for it. Just because she can do it, she kind of assumes that everyone else can. So I said, do you want to try? After a few days, I told her to try set up a Facebook page, put our art out, and then just set up a Facebook ad to say, for everyone who wants his or her face or portrait to be painted, she would just like go on her website and then ask for it for X amount of money. She tried it for 2 days and it worked. And right now she just have like so many clients asking her to paint online, like people from all around the world, which she wasn't thinking about at all. So I just want you to speak on the issue of like, if you're an artist, usually you feel like your work isn't just worth somebody paying for it just because you can do it. I don't know if you have ever sensed that before or you have heard it from other people.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that applies, this idea applies across the board. So right. The first thing is you need to know your value in the world, the value of the work that you're putting out. And people will pay as little as they possibly can to have it, right? That's the other thing.
Yes.
And so it's the old adage, is it price is only an issue in the absence of value, right? And with art, it can be somewhat arbitrary, but you have to set some kind of a floor, because you don't want to be exploited. I mean, yes. I can't tell you how many artists and other folks who are doing creative work are exploited every day. And this is absolutely, I was just having this conversation actually with a very prominent video artist here in New York. We talked about this, and my sister-in-law, who's a musician, like, people expect artists to do work for free.
Yes.
Right? I don't know if you've ever experienced this.
It's
so maybe
really
when
common,
maybe when you're starting out, it's like, okay, or if it's a nonprofit or it's some kind of community benefit or something like that, right? You can justify that, but no. Let's just pause it right there. Your work, your contribution to the world has some degree of value. It's always a question of, how do you find out, one, if there's a budget? And so the first question is, what's the budget, right? If it's not that kind of relationship, then it's, yes, it's establishing a floor. And then if you have to, be somewhat flexible, because you know what your needs are economically. Like, no one else can tell you that. You know what you need to survive and sustain and thrive, and like how much work goes into each of your work. So, in the case of your friend, ultimately, I assume you settle on some kind of price. But the suggestion there is like, you only know by testing different price points, right?
Yes.
And you don't want to commoditize your work, because your work is very distinctive and no one else can do it. So you have to play with different numbers a little bit. And it's not that you're grubbing or trying to run one over on someone else. The idea is instead to say, look, my work has value. I'm going to defend the value of it. And if they're not willing to pay for it, then it's probably better that you're not in a relationship with that person. That would be my response to it. But I would say, look at some other artists in your space who've done very well and find out what they're charging for their work, and use that as some kind of a barometer. But don't simply default or defer to some random price or arbitrary price that someone throws at you. Where there's already enough downward pricing pressure created on artists and creators by so many platforms out there, and sort of this weird globalization thing that's happening. You have to stand up, defend your work, and you have to give it a value, and only you can assign what that's worth. You should know that if you're going into a project, what your time is going to cost and is worth. Or if it's simply the project's completed and now you're putting it out on display, then you have to be able to price it appropriately. Don't settle on that, is my advice.
Right. So let's quickly jump to for folks that are already like established in their business or in their art career, they're doing well. What would, or like say freelancers, or guys who will just like have a art startup of some sort, what would be your advice based on your experience? What are the things that one shouldn't do so that they become successful, or they become at least on top of the game?
Okay, so the first piece is this, and I think it's true of all artists, regardless of where you are. You can be completely successful, you can be just starting out. Is again not to ever settle, because your body of work should continue expanding, and that requires movement and motion, and requires exploration and curiosity, and it also requires sometimes that you unplug and disconnect and a little while so you can have a clear mind about it. I think in a day-to-day practical sense, it is a few things. One is allocating appropriate amount of time for work every day, for being productive, even if it's very subtle types of production. Maybe sometimes it's incredibly heavy production, but you have to make time for it and be very focused and be very disciplined about it. The other piece is to leave ample white space on your calendar, because you'll find that a lot of breakthroughs and kind of the innovation in your art and the bigger questions, you can start working through when you have that space on your calendar. You're not assigned anything. It's that unfocus where your neural connections are free, and you're like, wow, this is an incredible epiphany. I think that's very important, and I think part and parcel of that is also being very, very open to channeling inspiration in your everyday. Great. I mean, I don't know how many of us do this mindfully, but it could be anything from like you being in Cape Town, right? Connecting. How can you not connect with nature and watch the sunset over the ocean or over Table Mountain, right? Or perhaps it's inviting friends to your place, or maybe it's making new connections with people and experiencing joy together. Or if it's solitude that you need as an artist, and many of us do, I certainly do, it's burying yourself in quiet time, or meditative time, or taking a long walk or a hike, or finding an intriguing book with the new ideas that sparks connections, and you then apply that to your work in some way, or meeting someone new, or going on a date, or getting laid, or whatever works for you, right? You want to find that magical rhythm where you're functioning and productive as an artist, and you're listening to that rhythm, you're sticking with it, again, developing those rituals, but also working through the kind of unscheduled space in your life, right? It's unplugging as well. And that you in doing that, right, sort of shifting back and forth from focus on focus, you're going to find that I would argue you find life more enriching and joyful and colorful, and that you allow that adventure to unfold. Now, it's also to say that you again are like responsible for your own fulfillment. So you need to go out and push yourself to some degree, but also find ways to pull back when necessary. So if it's for you, Gray, maybe it's 4 or 5 hours a day in the studio. And then it's also finding like a good block of time when you're out of it so you can recharge. Or could be significantly longer if you're on deadline or something like that. But I think it's again finding that space where you're deeply engaged in the work, and then you're deeply unplugged from it. And that's where the beautiful balance is, because you're working through that sense of self, sense of purpose as an artist, but also propelling yourself into the unknown. And so all of these things kind of work in tandem.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree to that. And on saying living in Cape Town, it's totally a big contribution to how I make my art and how I just make everything work on my side. Like, my office is situated at a nice spot, like I said. where you can work for a little bit on a break, and you go downstairs. So there's a lot of restaurants. If you're a clubbing person, there's a lot of clubs, and everything is there. So you can actually disconnect quickly, and then you get back to work. I'm just curious, how did you build your network? Because in the last few years, I've actually thought of building a network. So for me, it has actually been manufactured over time, where I had to intentionally go like, okay, I need to build a network, a good, important network. How do I go about it? Then I came up with a few strategies after I read a few books and stuff. How did you build your network?
So first of all, let's deconstruct the word network, because the answer is mysteriously embedded in that word. So network, right? So the net and the work. The work part is actually finding other people, going out and seeking them, finding ways that you can help them. So in practical sense, it's, again, looking for those small moments, or listening for those small moments of opportunity to interject and introduce yourself and talk about what you do, or to perhaps compliment someone else that you might see or listen to at the cafe, right? Or trying a new or novel experience. Maybe it's going to a museum and leading a group, or maybe it's a more of a social gathering and talking about the work you do. But it's putting yourself in a position where you can talk to other people on a daily basis. That's the key piece of it. So the net of the work is that you're building that community, and you're engaging in things that are you're passionate about, and they may be completely unrelated to your work. So for example, let's say you care about nature and preserving habitat for the wild baboons outside of Cape Town or something like that, right? So you want to join a group of people who are like-minded, and I mean you'll have one sort of shared value, but you want to talk about your art at some point as well, and people want to talk about other things. So it's just simply putting yourself in motion where you're coming into contact, or there's collisions of opportunity and energy. I mean, we're all just energy anyway, where we're talking to people about different topics. It's context. So it's going to the cafe, it's going to the church, it's going to some kind of community center, it's creating experiences which people want, whether it's going to a music show or presenting your work publicly or something like that. Again, it's just getting yourself out there. That's the main thing. But I'll say, for me personally, it was coming back to this idea of what we call opportunity architecture. So what is that? It's really about the three things you can do, and we term these the unseen laws of hustle, right? One is kind of the heart layer, which is to hustle in your heart, and that is to do something that moves you every day. And in putting yourself in motion, that motion or movement itself will imbue you with a sense of energy and enthusiasm and excitement. And the reason why is because when you're in motion, you find that your mind is less occupied or preoccupied, and that you're physically present in your body. And that is going to allow you to discover the serendipity or unexpected things. So the first thing is really to do something that moves you. If you're drawn to certain issues or experiences or events, that is going to put you in a position to meet someone new. We've already covered that opportunity is connected to people or attached to people. Jobs are attached to people. Experiences are attached to people. So you want to focus on that. The second, this notion of hustling in your head, right? The head is that kind of strategic, analytical, creative, imaginative space. How do you do that? And why do you do that? Well, you do that because you're looking for opportunity, right? You have to suss it out. You have to usually, where might there be an opportunity here? How do you connect ideas? How might you connect an experience to something artistic that you want to do or you want to explore in your work? And you only can do that by channeling what we call the second unseen law, which is to keep your head up and your eyes open. When you keep your head up and your eyes open, things begin appearing to you in new ways, and you can start sort of seeing the unseen or the hidden opportunity that so many people overlook. And the beauty of that is when you're looking for things, you'll find that luck finds you as well, because it's that luck of motion or movement. That's that hustle luck, and that's a very magical force. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is sealing the deal to make it real, and that's the third law, which is to say that you shouldn't, if you've just met someone, make sure it's sort of obvious, but very practically get their contact information. So here's a good tip for people: don't carry a card with you. Make sure you collect someone else's card.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. So the hack there
I
is
use that one as well.
Absolutely, because it works. And I'll give you another example. I was at a very prominent art fair. This is going back a year and a half, and I was with some business partners of mine. And I said, I want to show you something to prove that this works. And I introduced myself to the artist. He's a very well-known artist from Miami. And I said, hi, I'm blah, blah, blah. I'm a producer, and I'm really interested in your work. And I was, and that was totally authentic. I said, do you have a card? And what did the artist say to me? No, I'm sorry, I don't have a card. May I have yours? Well, why did they do that? Of course, and I had just seen them give out a card because they wanted to ensure that information, my name, and that validation. They wanted to seal the deal to make it real. They wanted to create some kind of transaction where they have that value exchange, and now they've got me, right? They've got my contact, and they know I'm hungry for more. That's the point. So so it's not like I'm hustling or one-upping someone. No, it's actually I'm opening up so that I can create these relationships. And I would argue that every relationship you enter into is to some degree a partnership, right? Most people don't see it that way, but that's the way I see the world. So for me, it's always been a journey of sussing out people I think are interesting and projects that are interesting, and building a partnership around those people and projects, and looking at it like over the long haul, like how we can create value in the world or move people in the world in some way, right? That's what you're looking for. It's not, it's not simply a quantity thing. It's really a quality thing. And again, life is very short, so choose your partners wisely.
Right. Yeah. Which is interesting because I get people saying things like, but I don't have so many friends, or I just don't know a lot of people. But like that's something you can actually physically wake up and start working on, and actually have a spreadsheet basically, which you can see it grow eventually over time. One thing that I want to talk about, you touched on it, but I just want to kind of have a little section about it, is manufacturing luck. Because the concept of luck seems to a lot of people like it's something that when it's called luck, it just comes out of the blue, like a miracle, someone would say. But in the book, you have, I think, a section that talks about manufacturing luck. How do you explain that?
Well, this is one of the more, I'd argue, one of the more sort of mystical things in life. Different levels of luck. But the way that we studied it and kind of broke it down is based on the work of Dr. James Austin, who was actually a medical doctor, but also was sort of fascinated by this idea of chance and serendipity. And what we say is that, and so this is my theory, and it has been forever, is that luck is actually more of a genetic tool that's hard-coded into our DNA, and it tends to bubble up from deep within our bone marrow just when we need it, right? And I think experience will validate that for most people, but then it's like, well, how do you explain those who are unlucky? Well, there's an explanation for that as well, but most of this comes around this idea that we innately have an ability to manufacture our own luck in 4 different ways, and again, I think it's a primal experience, but it's also very practical. And the big piece of it is by simply putting ourselves in motion. Now, let's back up for a second. So the science of luck is derived, and broken into these different layers. One is what we just simply experience as random luck or dumb luck. It's the luck of you walking into, or you going and buying a lottery ticket, right? And you win, or it's a very crowded, say art fair you're at, and someone drops a $1 million bill and you pick it up, right? And they say no, you keep it. This is random or dumb luck. Okay. Yes. It just happens spontaneously to some degree, and there's no clear explanation by it. People might call it karma or chance, but it's just random. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It doesn't make any sense. The second, and I think is absolutely critical, is this notion of hustle luck. Well, this is a luck that's created by your momentum and motion every day. And it's a luck that, could be derived from, say, a conversation of meeting someone at a coffee shop who happens to be a fan of the type of work you do. Well, how do you generate that? Because you put yourself in the position to have a conversation, to show your work, and they said, wow, that's really interesting. I'd love to have a deeper conversation about that. And yes. Guess what, Gray? I'm going to commission you to do a $20,000 mural on the ceiling of my bedroom because I think it's so cool and I want to wake up and go to sleep to that every night, right? It's that kind of experience. Striking up conversations with random people leads to, what we call hustle luck, a luck of motion. And the thing is, like, it's that great unknown space. But again, it's not the luck of standing still. It's or being stagnant. It's a luck of movement, right? The next luck is what we call hidden luck. And hidden luck is more interesting. It requires generally more imagination. And it's a luck that we say, where sort of chance favors the prepared mind. It's a luck that comes by way of creative synthesis. It's the experience of what you've done in the past that has brought you into a situation in the present, and being able to also sort of see the future and make these connections of ideas and concepts and designs. So part of this is about exploring your skill set and applying it in novel ways, in innovative ways, right? The example we use in the book is Casey Neistat, who of course is the famous YouTube teller. He's always been about a sort of work in progress and blends his talents into really interesting visual stories, and that allowed him to be discovered, but also allowed him more risk and to try new things. And again, that's about surfacing these experiences that really resonate with people, and that's allowed him to succeed, and to keep moving, and that that's really interesting. And then the last one I think is most interesting to me personally is this idea of quirky luck. And quirky luck is really about the luck that we innately possess based on who we are, just by being ourselves and our strange quirks and our way of conversing with others and our sort of way of being, and that can draw a lot of people to us. If we do strange things, or we take interesting risks, and we use our art as an extension of our being, it can either repel people or bring them toward you and attract them in big ways and interesting ways. So those, there's 4 types of luck, and if we think about that for a second, we should all recognize that to be alive is a gift, and a part of that gift is that we're lucky, and then we can make ourselves luckier every day. And even for the most skeptical among us, I ask them or challenge them to reflect on some experiences that they can't simply explain. Well, I bet you some degree of luck isn't involved there. Like if you're successful, someone discovering your work, or noticing a quirk about you and saying, you're a really interesting being, I want to talk to you more. Those are examples of luck.
Right. So, I mean, I can go on and on and ask you questions. I would just recommend the guys who haven't read your book to actually find it on Amazon or in their favorite bookstores and have a look at it. But one thing that maybe would finish with is that most of the listeners of this podcast are actually high-driven individuals, trying to hustle as much as they can, working long hours, typically like myself. And, some of them got 2 jobs, or maybe they have a job and their own hustle on the side. So just 24 hours isn't just enough, to sleep in the same 24 hours and then to work just doesn't quite work. With your story, how do you break that down? Or what is your perspective of what should work be arranged or scheduled like?
I think that's very subjective, Gray. And I think each of us knows the best times of the day for us to work and the best circumstances. Again, if it's a quiet time late at night, or if it's early in the morning, or if it's in the middle of the day, when you're at your best. And that also requires a few things. One is you have to know yourself, know your body, and know your mind. And that also means you need to take care of yourself. You're not going to be as productive, creative, constructive, or effective in your work if you're treating your body like a garbage can. You can't do that. So you've got to find one way to sort of treat yourself well so that you can be imaginative and creative and feel rested and have energy and enthusiasm and resources. Another thing that's important is that you also need to think about what is a good ritual system, owning your time. So might it be a block of 4 hours every day where it's unimpeded and uninterrupted? Is that possible for you? Might it be a shorter block? Again, it's you taking some degree of ownership over your time. And I don't know what that looks like for you, but for me, it is. I actually have a very, very structured schedule, and I review it every week. And it sounds a little obsessive compulsive, But the reason why I do that, and I also have, white space on my calendar as well for, more creative pursuits and the serendipity that we talked about. But the reason you do that is that you don't want to allow anyone or anything else to set you off track. You have enough bombarding you every day. So you say, that's the time that you're going to take ownership of so you can do your best work. So, for example, if it means, getting into the studio at 6 or 7 a.m. and working for a few hours, much as like how we did with the book, like we were very structured about it. And then, you allow yourself to unfocused and unstructured as well, and then if it means like you're working 6 days a week and you're on a crazy deadline and you're producing a series of works or studies or something like that, then it's knowing that you're going to need on the tail end of that to do what's called counterbalancing, which is to say you're going to recharge and you're not going to do any work. You're going to step away from it for a while. But it's finding those little blocks of times when you can be most effective and most productive, scheduling them regularly, being mindful of that, and also not burning yourself out. I mean, as you know well, I had a stroke when I was in my mid-20s working at a startup, and at the time I was doing a lot of stuff in the video world, and it was in the education space, and it was fascinating, but it was too much. And on top of that, I was trying to do, I was working on my first film and not sleeping and drinking way too much coffee and just not taking care of myself. Well, I learned that the hard way, and I'm very fortunate to be able to have a conversation with you, Gray. But I would like to spare other people the burden or weight of that kind of misery, because it's not fun to go blind and lose your mental faculties and not be able to articulate your thoughts. So instead, it's like, okay, forget about balance, but instead think about structuring your life so you can be productive as an artist over the long haul. And that means creating those rituals where you have time dedicated for work and then time dedicated to unwork, right? Unscheduling.
Right. That sounds totally awesome. Exactly what I thought you would say, because I read your article as well on this specific subject. And then while somebody would say, okay, I work for a company, I don't work for myself, but I think my best time to work isn't in the morning, is maybe starting from 11 going up, or I work better in the evening. How do they go about it? Because it seems like the 9 to 5 culture is just like, is the standard. So it regardless of how good you work and how you play around your hours. And my take on that, what I did is like, I understand myself, my best work hours, I work really, really good at night. And so I try to sleep around 2 or 3 in the AM and maybe wake up later in the morning. But I really don't care so much of what I do, like from 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock to like around 11. From there, that's when actually my day starts. And I don't know how someone else would approach that if they're like conservatively under the 9 to 5 bubble.
Sure. Well, again, this too is an idiosyncratic, subjective, and also can be a very quirky experience. So let's take the situation where you are a 9 to 5er. Let's say the careerist, right? You're in that, love your job, and that's great, and you're looking for an outlet so you can create art on the side, as many artists do. Or maybe you're a full-time artist and you don't have any kind of schedule. Well, that can be very challenging, right? Because you have to create your own structure and try to be ritualistic and sort of rigid with it so you're productive. Well, I would say this, that anyone else in the world, the bird that just flew by my window has 24 hours in the day. And within those 24 hours, some component of that is going to be dedicated to sleeping. Some component of that is going to be dedicated to eating. Some component of that is going to be dedicated to hopefully to exercise. And some component of that is going to be dedicated to study and work. Okay, so if that's the case, then you need to be responsible and prioritize when you think you'll be able to work. And if you are doing the 9 to 5 thing, maybe you get up a couple of hours early and you make the space, and even if it's only 3 days a week, just so that you can be creative and get out and get your work done. Or it could be after work, if you have the energy for it. Or maybe it's taking a nap after you work and then getting up and writing for 2 hours, or shooting a film, or illustrating. But again, it's subjective. You have to find the blocks that work. And I would also say this: experiment with time and experiment with the schedule, because there's no right or wrong way to do it. You have to find what works for you. And again, it's getting back to that sense of rhythm where you can be productive, right? Where you're not burning yourself out, and that you're enjoying the process of working, even though it can be miserable at times. Like you're working towards something, and that is where you can draw fulfillment. If you're, I mean, it can be a real problem, and I can remember, you know, as I said before, like, you know, you overwork, right, where you're putting yourself in a position where you're suffering or sick. That's not what work's about. So it's, you know, it's finding those moments, and maybe it's like, you know, dedicating time on your weekends where you're only going to be working in the studio, and like that's, you know, you get away and work in your studio, and that's what you're doing. And during the week, it's, you know, you're focused on your career. On the other hand, if you're a full-time artist and you have that luxury, God, what a luxury that is, then look, you know what works best for you, and you can be completely quirky about it. You can work from, you know, 10 in the evening until 7 in the morning or something like that, and find your sleep during the day if you want to do that. But you have to find what allows you to focus, what allows you to feel like you're empowered and you're really in a good groove on your work, and that can be very challenging. But you know, use your calendar. Like, it's there. It's a great tool. It's there for a reason, and no one else is going to do it for you. So, you know, and then not only do it, but do it now. Like, when you, as you're listening, like, pause this podcast, take a look at your calendar. Are you blocking time or making time or allocating time for you to do work every week? If you're not, you're probably not going to be productive. That would be my argument.
Right. But then, say, what would be the tactical approach? I know it's subjective as well. What would be the tactical approach for somebody to negotiate timing at work, for example? I mean, you're a startup guy. You have employees. What would you appreciate as an approach for from one of your employees to say they're trying to negotiate time? What would you react to that? Say, I come to you and I say, I don't really work that well in the morning. I'm sort of a night person. Can I start working late at 10 or 11? Then maybe finish a little bit later as well in the evening. How would you react to that?
I would say this. I don't believe in conventions. I think what I do believe in is quality of work, and that everyone is sort of in the project together and has a responsibility. As long as you're delivering quality work and you're open, honest, and transparent about your needs, I would be totally supportive, Gray, right? So yes. I think it's up to, you know, the person that you're working for or with to help you sort that out. And the key there is to approach them and be very open and transparent and say, look, my best work is done between these hours. And here's the body of work, that proof that we talked about from the pop layer before. Like, here's the proof. I did this work, produced it, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's a pretty logical argument. Why does anyone have to honor the conventions of 8 to 5 or 8 to 6 or 9 to 7 or whatever it might be? Instead, say, look, you know, we're 40-hour work week world. We really are. And the conventions of that, you know, that 9 to 5 should be thrown out the window, I would argue. They're very much a vestige, an anachronism that no longer fits in this world. So move away from that old world model. You have to find, and if the people are rigid on that, if they're unlike me and they're rigid and say, no, you know, everyone works this way and so therefore everyone should, well, it's time to find a new place to work. That's the simple answer. Or to find a boss who says, you know what, I get it and I'm going to support that idea, but you have a huge responsibility. They're paying you, number one, so you better make sure you come through with it, right? And so, you know, this is really a big, I think, communication issue or even a crisis, I'd say, because I think, you know, especially among millennials and folks who are even younger, you know, there is a desire to have that more autonomy, and I think autonomy is great, especially as an artist. You need that. So the structural piece is, you know, putting yourself on a deadline and honoring that. As long as you can do that and produce great work, I'm open to it. And I'd say, you know, have that conversation with your boss and say, look, you know, I need to talk about schedule because I know that I'm most productive working on this schedule. And you define that and say, you know, if you allow me to have that flexibility, I will agree to producing X, Y, and Z by this date, right? And it's going to be high quality and getting feedback along the way and so forth. So again, you're working in partnership. You're defining it along unconventional lines, right? Because you're not a robot or automaton. You're not programmed to, you know, get up at 7 and go to work from 9 to 5 and come home. And that's not the way it works. You're a human being, and especially as an artist, you have needs and wants. If you have family involved, then it gets a little more complex. So you have to find what works for you, and you have to find people, partners, bosses, etc., who are supportive of that. And that can be a hard thing to do, and that takes time. You need to build that trust as well. As a freelancer, it can be a little more, you know, navigatable.
Right. Okay. Thanks so much, John. I really appreciate it. It was a blast.
My pleasure, Gray.
Looking forward to this conversation. Whenever you hit Cape Town, just let me know. I can show you a few really good spots for coffee, beer, food, whatever you can name. Trust me.
As long as we can stay away from the great whites, I'm very happy.
Oh yeah, definitely not there. Definitely not.
There's some big sharks there, my man. So yes, I look forward to it, Gray, and thanks so much, man. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I hope your audience takes some value away. And if any of them wants to further explore any of the points that we made, obviously I encourage them to pick up a copy of Hustle. I believe it's available. I think we're in 11 or 12 countries now, including South Africa, and
yes.
And beyond that, they can reach me just by writing jonas@hustlegeneration.com. That's easy, or you can check out any of Koffler Pictures or some of the other projects, and we'll continue the conversation.
And that was the end of my conversation with John. If you have anything else to say, you know what to do. Go on the website and comment. You can also Google him and find him on Twitter and all these kind of things like that. But I just want to say thanks for taking your time listening to this and reaching to this point over an hour. It's actually of a rare bleed in this day and age for a human being to be able to concentrate for an hour listening to online content. I mean, keeping in mind of all these distractions that we have, our phones and all the cat videos online, which is entertaining sometimes, but it's not easy to make time for things that are actually important or that can help your life to improve in one way or another. So I say thank you, and remember to support the podcast by subscribing or leaving a 5-star review on iTunes, and stay awesome. Thank you.